So I want to talk about basic brawl positioning. This is like a really basic video, but I think a lot of teams struggle with basically understanding just like the straight up basics of how to use corners, understanding like how open space like correlates into it, how to deal with certain like basic map setups, and stuff like that. So we're gonna talk a lot about basic brawl position. And so when I talk about this, there are three really big overlying concepts that come to mind. Let me also move my... Here, there we go. There are three basic things that come to mind. It's called corner, or at least I call it corner to corner. There is corner to open space. And there is corner, open space, corner. These are like the three like basics. There are other ones too, right? This is in general all flat areas. I'm not even touching high grounds because that gets a bit more, interesting. But we're basically gonna look at these first, okay? And the first thing we're gonna talk about, and I have some cool examples, is the concept of corner to open space. All right, so let's sort of over here. Okay, let's skip to timestamp. Okay, so looking at Rialto, right? And doesn't really matter the SR of this. What I'm really using this for is just an actual concept and understanding of like how people set up in Brawl Mirror, and sort of how to position and sort of abuse actually map environment. I need Epic Pen. Oops. Come on, Epic Pen. There we go. So, the first thing, right? Now, if the enemy team sort of like, we're mainly looking at the defending team. They're sort of chilling, right? They're basically playing this area. This is a corner. Now, we'll sort of see the enemy team. They will look to push. Blue team doesn't necessarily scout, which is a bit on them, right? But Lucio sees them. Now, the red team, right, is pushing through an open space. Like, this is a definition of literally like an open area, right? There is no environment. There's no corner for them really to use. This is open space. Now, the reason why this first thing is called, corner, open space, corner being here, to open space, is because the team that has a corner has a significant advantage. Why? You can legitimately just play this corner and shoot them for free, and the enemy team can't really stabilize. There's no corner for them, so they have to use, the Ryan shield, they have to use DM, maybe they may wall to take space, maybe they use ultimate to take space. If they're smart, maybe they do some other stuff, which we'll talk about in a bit, right? So essentially, like, that's sort of what has to happen, and this, you can essentially abuse this. So this blue team here could just stand here with the Ryan shield and just shoot at them, and by the time the fight actually would start, the red team would maybe be really low Ryan shield, or maybe the D.Va would have very low DM, which essentially gives these guys a massive advantage. Because whenever they want to, they can just sort of stabilize on this corner, whereas the enemy team cannot stabilize. Okay. So in general, the team that sort of has the corner has a natural advantage. The other way to look at this too is like normally it's a team that has point control, and the team that's sort of looking to push into them, or aka retaking. Oh, so now let's sort of swap it around. Let's sort of say you're the attacking team now, and you're trying to push into this situation. And we'll look at another example here. I think so. So you're the attacking team, and you're the one that's forced to sort of push in through open space to sort of, push into the enemy team and push the payload. So for instance, very simple example here, there's a corner here, there is open space over here. The attacking team has to push the cart, right, through the open space to eventually get to the corner. That sucks for the attacking team, right? The defending team can just spam them for free and maybe get a pick. So we could watch this. Attacking team's sort of there, right? They're sort of just like forced to do stuff. Unfortunately, Hanzo gets a pick. That's the problem, right? People can get picks. It happens. The Ryan eventually has to drop shield, right? So the concept, what I'm getting at, is how do you avoid this? Well, there's three basic ways to avoid it. And let me try. So the three basic ways to avoid it. The first thing is, can you rotate? Can you do a rotation? Next thing is, can you use some CDs to help you take space, or like deny? Can CDs to like deny the enemy? And the last one is you can use alts to take space. So CDs, right? You can immediately think of Maywalt. You could think of DM. You can think of Ryan Shield. There's a lot more. You can use Speed Boost if you really want to. I prefer you don't use Amp because you probably want to save Amp for like actually pushing on them. Rotations, I'll give an example in a second. And alts, you could use square and the enemy team just runs away for a second. So an example of a rotation would be with this push, what's happening is you're in open space the whole time. And it's a short distance, right? It's just here to here. But what you could do instead is you could do a rotation like this, where your team sort of goes behind through here. And in this situation, you're pretty much out of the enemy's LOS, but you're able to close this distance to this distance without being in open space. And then maybe one person could be on cart. This is if you're like absolutely, by the way, scared, like really, really, really scared to walk in this open space, you can use this rotation. And I'll give a better example of a very common situation that I think a lot of people should hopefully be able to, understand. A lot of teams in King's Row abuse this corner. Let's see here. Go. On King's Row on 3rd point, right over here, a lot of defensive teams will play this corner, and attacking teams struggle to be able to push through this open space. Right? Corners is red, the defending team. Attacking team has to push into them. A lot of people struggle. So instead, what really should happen here, you can obviously use Maywall and walk up. You could use ultimates, but another way to easily approach this is just say, let's just rotate like this, close distance, and then you'll get into what I call a corner-to-corner situation. We'll talk about in a second. So again, a rotation to help you close distance to be able to get out of that open space scenario, which really, really, really sucks. Let me give another example of why corner to... Yeah, that's good for now. So let me talk about corner to corner, now that we're sort of at that point. Here.
Welcome to Rialto.
So corner to corner. So eventually what ends up happening in most fights is eventually you have a corner and one team plays one side of the corner and another team plays the other side of the corner. So if we sort of like let this quickly play out here, the red team will walk through the open space and it'll be sort of a corner fight, right? This happens a lot. And so this is again one of like basic positions. Now, corner to corner fights are really, really, really special because you actually need to understand how to position correctly to get max value. So the first thing I always ask people is the backline. Is your backline happy playing all the way far back? And the answer is most BAPs are going to say no. They hate it because they're forced to just heal and they don't want to just heal. Because what happens is this is the Ryan and the enemy team's always forced to play sort of behind. Well, I'd put it more like this is the Ryan, the enemy team's forced to play behind. And this team's Ryan, the enemy team's also sort of forced to play behind. So there's sort of an imaginary line here. Now, the way to fix this, right, is this concept of what I like to call aggressively turning the corner. Where now this team, Ryan, now plays like this, and their team plays behind like here, which now allows this BAP in the back to be able to heal the team, plus also do damage to the team. So this is called aggressively turning the corner, or aggro turning the corner. So this team can do it, and they just shift. Once they do this, the biggest thing that's interesting that happens is it changes the dynamic. And what I mean by that is now who has the corner. Before you're fighting for the corner. Now, when you aggro turn the corner, this green team is able to take this corner now. So they're able to have the corner. They force the blue team into open space. We're also going to magically pretend that this little door thing doesn't exist. Right? So now you're going to say that these guys are essentially in open space, and it sucks because they're in open space. There's nowhere to kite. There's no, environment. Every damage they take, they're going to take. The other reason why this sucks is because the attacking team here, when they aggro turn the corner, now if they lamp, they can lamp the corner here. Whereas if these guys want a lamp, there's no corner for the lamp anymore. The lamp's going to be an open space, which means the lamp's just going to die instantly. So essentially what you're noticing here is whoever sort of aggro turns this corner first has a massive advantage. So we'll play out this fight and sort of see what happens. So these guys sort of, the red team, aggro turns the corner first. The blue team didn't really do anything. The blue team looks for a Mei ult, right? And gets a really good wall. But at this point also you can see these guys, look at this, where this Kree is. They're able to kite. The blue team split them up, so they push forward. But because they've got so much space, right? High noon. And obviously there are ults going on here. It's a bit different. Goes into like ebb and flow. Not gonna play this out fully. They chase the Ryan. You know, the Diva happens. They end up C9ing. Whatever. Right? But the concept being that the fact is these guys turned the corner and got a lot of value. Let me show you another great example of corner to corner. Okay, so here's a good example of corner to corner. So blue team is looking to recontest. This is a different example, sort of, but once they drop where the Ryan is, this becomes a corner, open space to corner. So you can see open space to corner. The red team has the corner, but because they messed up lamp, they can't really hold it anymore. Now what ends up happening here is the blue team is like, okay, we're going to aggro take this corner. We're going to turn this corner aggressively. We're going to use this high noon to help us. And as soon as they do this, what happens to the red team? Well, the red team loses their corner and they're forced into open space now. And now the blue team can push. And they get insane value. And I'll talk about like high noon and like maybe window a bit later. And I'll give a cool example. But that's sort of essentially how, you know, corners to... or open space to corners work, and corners to corners work, and how sometimes you can push up into this corner to corner situation. Here. Alright, so let's talk about another situation. Let's talk about the last one, which is corner, open space. Now, this is like the other normal one that happens a lot, where essentially you'll have you'll have one team playing here. We'll have another team playing colors over here. And they'll sort of be like giving this death glare to each other. And they'll sort of just be staring at each other and be like, you know, like who's going to push first? Who's going to push first? Who's going to, you know, like, you know, actually go in? And the biggest thing to realize here is in this situation, the person who has point control doesn't really need to necessarily make a move. The person who doesn't have point control, for example, the attacking team that actually needs to push the cart, for instance, let's say the cart's like over on the cart's white, right? The green team needs to push forward because they need to push the cart. The yellow team doesn't need to do anything. The yellow team can just chill here and they can just, you know, kite. They can, like, if they take poke, they can just sort of just back up and, you know, hide behind the corner and they'll live. The green team sort of has to make a decision. They sort of need to like think about sort of like, they not necessarily think, but they need to like do something. So essentially, you know, let's talk about that. So they need to push into the enemy team. So how are they going to do that? Well, obviously they want to try and find some advantage. And the way to find some advantage is maybe try and force some cooldowns. And they could poke the enemy team, maybe try and break Ryan's shield, get some value. Maybe they forced Lamp, luckily. Maybe they forced a lot of DM. Maybe they get lucky and essentially force CDs. And then they realize the CDs are forced, so they walk forward and they take space. Which, very unlikely, but could happen. What's more likely is essentially you do stuff to essentially force seat the enemy CDs so you can take space. And so what are the things you could do? Well, you could use an ultimate, right? You could use an ult like window and essentially the enemy team will back up, or they'll force lamp, or you'll break shield. Maybe you'll burst and kill somebody. You could use like high noon, right? You could use what I like to call enablers to take space. You could use your own CDs to take space, like we sort of talked about in the situation of corner to open space, like all the way back. Oh, we'll just get back here. All the way back here, where the attacking team. Oh, yeah, it's over here. Sorry, where the attacking team could sort of, you know, walk up with Ryan shield. They could use Maywall. They could use DM. Get it back. There we go. There. Cool. So you could use your CDs, right? And the green team could walk up and they could use, let's They could walk up and they could May wall and just walk up there, and then they could like go into a fight where now it's corner to corner and they could fight it out. They could use window, and then they could walk up with the window and then again go into a corner to corner fight. So all that's sort of viable. And what I'll say is that it sucks for the attacking team, because the defensive team, if they're smart, which most teams don't really do this, they could just abuse the corner. Most teams, as soon as they see a window, what they're going to do is lamp immediately. But the fact of the matter is, as soon as the window happens, you have a few things you could do. You could look to, just hide on the corner. You don't even have to use anything. The second thing you can do is you can May wall. You're not using an ultimate, or not an ultimate. You're not using lamp or another ultimate, or you could use like the lamp. Or last thing is you can counter ult, or sort of like a match and ult. So if the enemy team uses green, uses window, right, to try and take space, then you could use window too, right? But even before that, there's so many other options that you could do that essentially makes the trade not that great for green. What could happen is green could use like window and start walking up here. These guys just hide for a second and then pop back out, right, when they want to, and then maybe they use window and they catch green in open space. So, and a lot of this has to be practiced. It's not something that happens like naturally, but with a little bit of time and practice, it's definitely achievable. So teams that are sort of attacking, definitely more difficult for them, because they have to deal with a lot of because essentially they have to take space, and they're normally forced to use a lot more ults normally, and it's a bit more rough. However, I will say rotations and off angles and flanks definitely help. I'm not going to go too much into that, but like you already saw it a little bit earlier, like you can use rotations to help you close distance so you can get more value. And flank, really good flankage. If anyone see Tayo play, really good flanks can really help as well. Okay, let's see if I missed anything here. Talked about enemy that. Talked about how it takes you into a corner situation. All right, let me talk about like a few other things really fast. One of the other biggest, misconceptions, or I'll give you actually another example that I have really fast on Amora. So an example, of the power of. Okay, so essentially here, what TI used to do a lot of, and it was something that Tayo came up with, is what we'd do is we'd push Hanamura, we would take Catwalk here, enemy team would be on the high ground, and this was in like May McCree Brawl. We would then have our Ryan here, and we'd have a shield, our McCree would high noon, and then our Diva would force point, and the enemy team would be forced to make a decision. The decision would be, do we go to point? If we go to point, it's a bad color. If they go to point, then they have to deal with essentially the McCree high noon and get high nooned, or they have to give ticks. So not really a fun decision for them. And this is like a very basic strategy where essentially you can force resources and force someone into open space. And how this is sort of relevant is because I'm going to talk about basic sort of positioning, and this is sort of like a spam positioning type of thing. And I'll talk about it in a second. Another way to also approach this, is it happens a little rarely, right? But if the enemy team was on point, let's say, or just chilling down here, and you came up here, and you had your Ryan, you had your, let's say, McCree, and then maybe this time you have BAP, we'll use a different example, and you window. Now, when you window, the enemy team is going to be forced to hide in these two little areas. Now, what you want to do is you want to leave the BAP and McCree back here. McCree and BAP back here. They'll shoot through the window. And then your Ryan, May, and your Diva will push into these guys. And go really hard. They'll choose one and like push into them. Maybe May wall off the other. And essentially, preferably the one that has a May, so they can't counter wall. And the person that's sort of on this side will have to basically take a beating. Why? Because if they try and kite or back up anything, then the McCree BAP is just going to hit them. So sort of the concept of using it's the concept of using high noon or window to essentially brawl aggressively and force the enemy Ryan to essentially force the shield, or yeah. And imagine again, I'll use an example of what if there was no natural cover here? What if these boxes didn't exist? Then it'd be even harder for the Reinhardt player. Okay. Now let's talk about another concept. which is... So it's a very basic thing. I'm not going to go too much into it, but there's essentially a lot of ways to play aggressive, like play aggro. Like everyone knows this. Like there's a lot, like there's multiple ways to play aggro. First one is just run it down. Not going to go into it. Run it down. Second one is just like setting up backline. And the third one is what I like to call like aggressively holding space. Aggressively holding space. Another way to look at this sort of is choking. But what's really important is like that's also considered playing aggressive. So an example being if you're playing this map here, highlight this, easier to see it, the chokes, the open areas, so it's like that. So if you're playing this map and your team is inside and the enemy team is outside, the fact of the matter is that if you're on red and you've got point control, do you need to do anything? And the answer is no, you don't. The enemy team has to do something to push into you, and that sucks for them. Why? Because you've got a Mei. Like, again, we're focusing on Brawl. You've got Mei McCree. They have to push through a choke. If they do, they're just going to get walled, and you punish them. So this is an example of sort of aggressively holding space, right? You're not actually running into them, right? You're not doing anything. But by you holding this choke, you're inherently doing something that's very aggressive. So you can sort of relate this to like a lot of chokes, like King's Row Arches, or what are some other good ones? Nepal Village, if you're holding point. So you can sort of relate it there. Right. There it is. Okay. Next topic. Last topic. The last topic I want to talk about is just general positionings that isn't related to necessarily environment and corners. It's sort of just how people should position in general. And I'll sort of use King's Row sort of as an example. A lot of things. Oh. Alright, we'll use this as an example. Alright, so a lot of people fight on statue. It's a pretty normal thing, right? You normally have a Reinhardt here. You normally have another Reinhardt here. So the first thing I want to talk about is essentially the brawl pinching. And essentially how this works is you have groups, and the way to look at it is you have, find a better way. So I'm just gonna explain it this way. Reinhardt's here, and he's got a shield here. Now red team is looking to push into them, so you'll push. Ryan will push like this. There's a Lucio on the statue. The Mei will maybe push in like this. The Diva's got a high ground or an off angle, like this. McCree will maybe flank. McCree normally flanks, or will play with the Reinhardt to some extent. And the Baps over here being able to support everyone. Now the concept of this is that Ryan is getting pinched. He's getting pinched by the Mei, he's getting pinched by the Diva, and then Ryan's pushing into him. And also technically the Lucio is also pinching him. So he's sort of getting pinched, and Reinhardt can't really do anything when there's like 3 people around him that are just like basically just hitting him from all angles. Right. So this is sort of like pinching. Now, yeah, I'm not gonna go too much more into that, but that's sort of pinching. Another way to think about also general like brawl positioning is the aspect that Kree doesn't always have to be stacked on your team, is that Kree can go look for off angles. Diva denies angles while also looking for off angles. Lucio is always taking environment to look for boops to essentially prevent the enemy Mei, or looking for to like boop people into the team. And Ryan's looking to push with the Mei and looking for aggressive walls, or like using walls to like live. And Bap's sort of in a position that's always behind, that's able to heal everybody. Again, that's like very just basics. I'm sure I missed a lot there, but just keeping it very simple for now. That's brawl pinching. Now I'll talk about spam. Sort of like spam positioning. And we already looked at this before on Hanamura's second point, so I'm actually going to jump back there and grab it. So here, when we talk about Hanamura, right? This example I gave here where you're setting up the back line and you're forcing point and going aggro, where you're actually wait, I'm gonna use this better. This example is actually a really good example. Here, this example here, where we saw the high noon happen, this example can be sort of used almost as a spam example. And the reasoning is because when you high noon, we're going to pretend this high noon didn't happen. Instead, we're going to replace this with a square. So let's say there's a square here they're pushing, and the BAP and McCree are back here. The BAP and McCree are together. Then the Ryan will push with the Mei. The Ryan and Mei are together. The Devo will look for an off angle to help, and then the Lucio will sort of play again, sort of in the team or somewhere normally around the environment to help the team, and everyone has aura of the Lucio. So you sort of got this split where you've got Ryan Mei together, Diva off angling, Lucio sort of near the team, and then you got BAP McCree together. And this is more like a spammy way of playing. And the reason why this is really good is because your BAP McCree are now playing more range damage, and they're focusing on range damage. They're not brawling. And it's good that they're not with the Ryan, because your value comes from, you know, your BAP Kree spamming. If your BAP Kree are like literally stacked on your Reinhardt, they take cleave damage, and that's sort of pointless. You know, your Lucio doesn't want cleave damage, your Diva doesn't want cleave damage, so by them being split a little bit, they take less damage, and it splits focus, which makes it very hard for the enemy team to deal with. Okay. So I'm not going to go too much actually into choke positioning, because I've talked about it in the choke positioning video, so if you want to go watch that, you can. So that's sort of a basics on sort of like the three, you know, environment positioning type of things for Brawl, where it's, you know, you're playing on corners, and then is it a corner to corner situation? Is it a corner to open space situation? Is it a corner to open space to corner? Sort of how to deal with all of those situations at a very basic fundamental level. And then, you know, talking about the concept of actually aggressively holding space, which is sort of choking, and then going sort of into like general positioning of you know, brawl pinching and spam positioning. Actually, I also want to talk about one thing, and I love this thing, and I just thought of it, and I want to make sure I quickly bring it up. And it's the concept of essentially like bluffing. That's what I call it. I call it bluffing. And so there might be a lot of situations you know what I'm talking about, and a lot of people probably know. But essentially, when you're playing, you know, Brawl into Brawl, or Brawl into anything, let's say you're about to cap the point here, and you know, your Ryan's pushing up, and your Ryan knows for a fact that he can take this corner, but he's not sure if he can take this corner. The enemy team spawns, and there's like 4 or 5 people here, and the Ryan's like, okay, well, you know, I want to take the other corner, but you know, I only have like 2 people with me, and the enemy team is 4 or 5, but I'm gonna go for it. So now the Ryan pushes up, and he takes this corner. Team's right behind him. He's facing this way, and they're peppering the 4 or 5 people. Now again, the Ryan only has 2, 3 people. There's like 1 or 2 people on cart, right? Maybe 1 person in between, and this is essentially bluffing, because if you think about it, logically, is the Ryan able to hold this corner with, like, let's say it'd be a Ryan, Mei, Lucio, and maybe the Diva is sort of coming, the BAP's on cart, right? Maybe you could have you could probably actually have a Diva on cart and BAP up. But essentially, is the Ryan able to hold this corner into 4 or 5 people that are there? And the answer is probably no, unless he uses ult. Like, the enemy team could easily walk up with 4 or 5 people, challenge us into a corner-to-corner situation, and then, like, win. So the Ryan's, like, essentially bluffing, be like, you know what, this is my corner, like, don't push up here. You should, you know, stabilize on this corner right over here. And why is this good? Well, if the Ryan takes this corner, then, you know, the cart is able to push even more. The cart's able to push all the way up here, which makes this 1 fight situation instead of 2 fights on this corner. So this is sort of the concept of bluffing, where as a Ryan player, you might like be like, you know what, I'm going to try and like take a more aggressive space than, you know, is really feasible that the team I have, and try and, like, you know, bluff my way to keep this corner. And believe it or not, this will actually work a lot on a lot of teams. The biggest thing I'm going to say, though, if you notice the enemy team actually starting to push you, I'd highly suggest kiting and just, you know, playing the space that's actually safe. Okay. So that's it. Hopefully you learned a lot. And yeah.